Alright guys, today I'm going to share two builds that I think are good for newer players to start with. I'm going to go for one build that's pretty universal that you can use in PvE and PvP if you want to get into that as a new player. And the other one is basically, you can use it in PvP, but it's pretty much just like a speed clear weapon for dungeons or just open world fame farming. So I'm going to start with the one that's kind of universal. It's the one-handed battle axe with a fiend cowl, or you can switch it out with the mage cowl depending on what you're doing. Fiend cowl is usually for PvP. Um, and then the mercenary jacket and royal sandals, which you can switch out for whichever boots you run the most. I just do this as a PvPer because it increases your move speed and your damage. Although if you run into mana problems, you can run Scholar Sandals for the mana run, or health problems, which you probably shouldn't be running into with the Battle Axe because it has its own sustain and you're running the Merc Jacket, but you can run Plate Boots for the Rejuvenating Sprint. So that's the basic build. Um, that's pretty universal for whatever you want to do. The cape is interchangeable with whatever you want to do, but the Thetford cape is kind of just a good go-to because every about, I think it's 15 seconds. Yeah, 15 seconds you get an extra 214 damage for a 4-2 cape, which is, I bought this one for like 71k, so it's not super expensive. Like you probably shouldn't be able to break the bank with it. Um, so I'm going to go over the abilities. So if you don't have Rending Rage, I know especially if you're a new player, you're probably not going to have this because I'm pretty sure this is the level 85. Yeah, so you're probably not going to have Rending Rage. So what I would suggest for the Q, I would go with the second Q because if you're doing dungeons, then you're probably going to want to do damage to more than one target at the same time. So I would go with the second Q until you unlock this, and then I would definitely switch to this. This is just way better. But for the sake of this tutorial, I'll switch it to this so you guys can understand a little bit more of how it works. Basically, you do more damage the further away the person is from you. If you look down where all the stats are for this ability, it says distance 2.5 meters, you do 172 damage, or 5 meters, which is like the max range for it, you do 259 damage. And if you look over here, technically that's more damage than the first Q already if they're at the max range. Plus, it puts on a Rending Bleed charge, and you can have up to 3 Rending Bleed charges on a target. And basically, that just does about 100 damage over 6 seconds, and it can stack 3 times on any target. So that would be basically 300 damage over 6 seconds if you get 3 Rending charges on, whatever the target is, whether it's a mob or a player. And then for the W, I usually run Adrenaline Boost. This is more of a PvP kind of thing though, just because it increases your damage, which I would pair with the E, and I'll kind of show you how to do that. But it increases your move speed as well and your attack speed. So this is something that you would want to use along with either your E or the Mercenary Jacket healing ability, because it's going to increase your normal attack damage. Or sorry, not your normal attack damage, but the speed, right? So that way you can get more procs off with the Mercenary Jacket, so you heal yourself for more. But if you're having a harder time dealing with bosses, if you're doing PvE, I would switch to the first W, because it does a good chunk of damage and it decreases the damage resistance of whatever target you're fighting. So you can hit this and then use a Q and then one of your two E's. Preferably, you don't use your first E until you have 3 Rending Bleed charges, because if you have 3 Rending Bleed charges, you will do the maximum amount of damage, which I'll kind of show you guys all of this on the dummies in front of me. If you have Raging Blades unlocked later, and you're doing dungeons and you're doing it and you're like pulling a lot of mobs, you could definitely go for this because this is going to buff your damage by 40% if you hit all of the mobs with every blade, basically. So because right here it says it stacks up to 10 times. So that's 40% more damage that you can do with your E or your Qs or whatever abilities you're going to use, right? So that's for if you're taking on a lot of mobs or something like that. Like that's a pretty good fame farm type thing to use. Internal bleeding is not really that applicable. Like that's kind of a PvP thing. And then Battle Rush is okay. That's more for like ganking or 2v2 Hellgates, things like that. And then for the passive, I would just do deep cuts. So every 4 normal attacks, you put a bleed on the target. But I'm going to show you how the E works right now. So basically, once you have 3 rending bleed charges on a target, which you put on a target with your Qs, each time you do a Q, you apply a rending bleed charge to a target. This one will apply a rending bleed charge to more than one target that's around you. This one will only put it on a specific target that you select. And these two are basically the same for the fact that it's like an AoE kind of Q, right? But if you have 3 rending bleed charges, you can see towards the bottom of where these stats are, it says rending bleed charges 0, and then 1, 2, and 3. And then just underneath that, it has the damage numbers associated with however many bleed charges are on a target. So if you have 0 rending bleed charges with your first round of your E, you're going to do 668 damage. And keep in mind, I have spec in this axe, and it's a tier 6, so it's not going to do the same for you, especially if you're a new player. But all that stuff will come in time once you start faming things up and everything. But then 1 rending bleed charge, 763, 2 is 859, and 3 is 954. So that's all part of your first round for your E. So you can use your E twice with the battle axe, the one-handed battle axe. The second E heals you, and that is also based on how many rending bleed charges were on that target. So just underneath that, it says self-heal, and it has those numbers associated for the rending bleed charges. So I won't be able to really get low, but basically what you want to do here is you want to put rending bleed charges on them. As you can see, these blood markers, those are rending bleed charges. So that's 2. And then put 3 on there. So now if I use my first E, that did the maximum damage of 950, okay? So I've done a total of 1,090 damage so far, and that's just with 3 Qs and an E. Now, if I put the rending bleed charges back on the targets, and then I use my adrenaline boost, I will now do more damage. It's still ticking, there you go. 1,168 damage total to these targets. So the adrenaline boost increased the overall damage that I did by 25%. Now that's also, you can use it before the Qs. I usually use it kind of like mid-fight. So I will like put a couple stacks on someone, hit him with a couple of that, use my adrenaline boost, hit him with another Q, and then my E. So that already did a lot of damage. 1,788 damage. So that's already a lot of damage, right? Now if I went to Deadly Chop, this is for like solo bosses mainly. I would not really use this in a PvP scenario. Maybe in corrupted dungeons, maybe. It depends. That's only for if you're fighting against something that doesn't really have any kite ability, right? So with this one, same thing. You just want to put on the bleed charges. You do your normal attacks. And then with the W, Look at that. It's already above 2,500 damage. Okay. Now, again, keep in mind, this is a tier 6 axe, and I have spec in it. However, even if you're using a tier 4 axe, you're still going to be able to do like around 2,000 damage with that full combo. Now, with the mercenary jacket, it's pretty straightforward. When you use the mercenary jacket, you're going to have 6 seconds to do damage, direct damage to the target 7 times. So you theoretically you should be able to heal yourself for around 700 health if you actually get all of this off. Keep in mind, if it's a player, they might pop defensives or they might purge it or something like that, right? Also, with the Fiend Cowl, this is pretty much just for PvP. I wouldn't use Purge in a PvE scenario. It's kind of useless, to be honest. It doesn't work on bosses or anything like that. Now for food, I would do beef stew just for the extra damage, or if you're clearing mobs and things like that in the open world, you could go cabbage soup, or you could even use a fish if you want to. But cabbage soup for the health regeneration. So as soon as you're done killing one group of mobs, you already start your healing process, and by the time you get to the next group, you're already at full HP. For dungeons and PvP, you can use poisons. Poisons are good for harder bosses because it will decrease the target's damage resistance while the poison is active on the target. Or for PvP, I usually go out with Gigantify potions if I'm solo. However, do not use your healing abilities while this is active. So if you make yourself big and you try to heal yourself, you're going to technically heal yourself for less because your max health is increased. So it's kind of weird. Like, technically you're healing yourself for 84% less than you would be if you were healing yourself while this was not active. So make sure that you use this like when they're doing big damage to you, and then after it subsides, then you do your healing abilities. So yeah, that's basically the battle axe build. Again, you can swap this out for a mage cowl or something just for the extra fire damage. But now I'm going to show you the light crossbow build, which is basically for speed clearing. This is also a really good weapon for PvP a little bit, just because of this ability where it slows enemies and does damage to them, and it increases your movement speed. But this is kind of just a speed clearing build. So what you want to use is the second Q, which is the explosion. Third W, you should be able to get this really quickly. This is you only need level 15 on the crossbow tree to get this. And you might be looking at this and you're like, oh, it doesn't even do that much damage. Well, I'll show you why. The reason why you want to use this is because it refreshes every 5 seconds, and you want to be using the second passive ability. So after every 4 spells casts, you reset the cooldown on your first slot ability. Okay? And then the E basically just sticks to a target that you select, and after a couple seconds, it'll explode in a 5-meter radius and do a bunch of damage. With this build, I would suggest, if you're clearing mobs, a mage cowl for extra damage, a stalker jacket also for extra damage, and then scholar sandals or any type of cloth sandal really for the mana regen. The offhand it's better if you go with a crypt candle. However, you can, if you want to go on the cheaper side, you can use a torch just for like cooldown and attack speed, because the normal attack speed on this is pretty slow. But if you can use a crypt candle, you'll do more damage overall, and you'll have a little bit more mastery with it. But with this clearing build, the Caerleon Cape is a must, and this is because it refreshes your first slot ability as well. So basically, what you want to do is you want to select a target, you want to use an ability, Q, you have another Q, use your E, and then you have another Q. Alright? So that's the combo. So like every 4 abilities that you use, you're going to get your Q back. And that's pretty much the whole thing with this. Like, Once you get really good with it, you can use it in open world, but this is just a speed clearing build, to be honest. Again, you can go beef stew for damage, or if you want health regens, you can just go really, really quick. Cabbage soup is honestly pretty good if you're trying to speed clear stuff because you don't have any sustain in this build. So as soon as you're done clearing mobs, you'll start healing and you'll be good. For this build, Gigantify pots are not really something you want to use. I would just use poison pots. If you don't seem to be having issues with your mana, then you could switch over to Rejuvenating Sprint on plate boots, just so you do have a little bit of sustain. It might help with solo bosses. And another thing with solo bosses, if they're like real, like let's say you're tier 4 and you're trying to do like a tier 7 dungeon or something, like a 7 map, and you come across a boss that's really hard, I would switch to dodge roll, and every single boot has dodge roll. Okay, basically this is going to negate damage that you would have taken from really large abilities that the bosses would do. So I hope all that made sense to you guys. That was kind of a really quick explanation of how to do it. But yeah, I hope you guys learned something. If there's any other builds that you guys want me to explain or show you how to use, I would definitely be happy to. Just drop it down in the comments. And yeah, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed.